So hi there, my name is Chris Clay and I'm the Head of Science at Botany Downs Secondary College in Auckland, New Zealand. And the reason I'm talking to you today is because I was the person that was recently fortunate enough to win the Extending Learning Beyond the Classroom at the 2011 Microsoft Innovative Educators Forum in Washington D.C. And my project was called Keeping It Real, where REAL is standing for Real Experiences Activate Learning, which is a project that focuses on using technology to increase collaboration and the opportunities for asynchronous learning to occur. So throughout this presentation, what I'd like to do is obviously talk a little bit about my project, but also get you to consider the two questions on your screen right now that I feel are really important. And it would be really good to actually revisit these questions at the end of the presentation. So I'd like to think, how can we as teachers develop 21st century learning skills while still meeting the requirements of our curricula and standardized assessments? So obviously teachers have a lot of pressure put on them for meeting curricula and assessment requirements. So how can we do that as well as develop the 21st century skills that we feel are so important? And secondly, how can we provide challenges to students that develop skills that we actually as teachers don't possess? So that's looking at things like the fact that some students have skills such as programming and things like that that can be applied to a wide range of problems. How can we set challenges that allow them to use those skills to develop a solution, for example, to a problem that you might set in a subject such as biology? So let's have a bit of a look at the project that I was actually involved with. And as you can see on your screen right now, a big part of the project was involved around developing an online learning community. And the idea that supports this is that we want to try and connect learners together, connect teachers together, and also connect the teachers and the learners to the community, so that teachers and learners and the community all around a particular country or perhaps the world are all sort of interacting with one another as they're trying to learn the same things. So the motivation and, if you like, the inspiration for this project was I was within my own class of students. I'm a biology teacher, and I had a class of senior level students that are probably 17, 18 years old. And I noticed that they had many different strengths that they could each benefit from if they actually worked together. But typically, a great deal of their work was actually spent working in isolation to one another. So even though they might do group tasks whilst at school, a big part of their work that they did at home, studying, etc., was actually done whilst they were at home on their own. And I didn't feel that this actually reflected the way that people learn in the real world, in particular the way that scientists work in the real world. So with the class, we actually set about connecting students and the teacher together to promote collaborative learning. And as you can see from the guy sticking his thumb up there, it made the students really, really happy. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. So once we connected the teacher and the students together online so they could be in touch with each other whenever they wanted, the next step was actually to integrate the wider community to that. And because I'm a biology, we actually went out to, I'm a biology teacher, we went out to the community to connect with real world biologists. And we had them set students real world biology challenges that they were actually working on themselves. And that led to one student in the project actually submitting an article to an international scientific journal. And the scientist that he was actually helping has now become, if you like, his second author, the person that's supporting his work as he gets published, which is really quite exciting. Now, as the beautiful picture shows there, this started off with just one class, a group of about 16 or 17 students and myself, and has now actually led to over 150 students and teachers from more than 30 schools all around beautiful New Zealand. And I will do a little bit of a plug here about New Zealand. It is an absolutely awesome place. So, if you do get the chance to come out, you should really come and check us out. And there is a lot more than sheep and Lord of the Rings. So you should come out and check our beautiful beaches, our mountains, and the cities as well. We've got some great food and wine and beer. So yeah, anyway, there's my tourist pitch finished. Okay, so that's the community. Now let's have a look at the pedagogy that supports the entire project. So as you can see on your screen, there's three main points that I'm actually going to go through now. The pedagogy supporting the learning that's going on, a little bit more about the structure of the online community, and also looking at the outcomes of this project and how we actually know it was successful. So in terms of the pedagogy, there were 4 dimensions that really underpinned the way that we use technology. And as you can see on the screen there, we've got collaboration, critical thinking, asynchronous learning, and then this idea of formative assessment and feed forward and feedback. So with collaboration, it's just learners or people that are learning and teaching working together. And constantly, as that collaborative process is happening, the person that is the learner in one minute becomes the teacher in the next, as he's actually helping or she's helping another student to actually develop some knowledge. The critical thinking comes about as students or learners actually critique one another's ideas as they actually go about creating a product. And we'll talk a little bit about that product in a second or two. And then we've got asynchronous learning. Because of the nature of the community is online, students can access this learning opportunity whenever they want to and from wherever in the world they are. And then the formative assessment and feedback thing is the idea that teachers can get information and regular formative feedback by accessing the online community and looking at the contributions students are making on an ongoing basis. And they can use that information to inform the learning process that they're actually trying to work through with the students. So for example, if they notice that students are posting contributions that indicate that they lack some particular key piece of knowledge, they can use that information to inform their future planning to make sure that that information is covered succinctly in the classroom. So to make sure that we actually get this pedagogy working, we have employed a number of different e-learning tools. As you can see on the screen there, we've got the whole thing based around a wiki. And on that wiki, we've got 3 main areas where we can actually we can actually get the students to engage with the pedagogies we just talked about. The first one is the use of a discussion forum, where students actually post questions and then answer each other's questions. The second one is the use of collaborative notes. So just like Wikipedia, where people can actually create, if you like, notes on a particular topic, students would create notes on a particular topic involved in their biology learning, and they would work together to create a high quality piece of information or a set of notes. And then also we've got podcasts that allow teachers to create high quality explanations for really quite complex concepts. And all that is actually based on a wiki space. So I'd like to work through each one of those 3 areas just in a little bit of detail now. And we'll start off sort of in reverse order with the podcasts, which is really useful because what the podcasts do is it provides the teacher to create a short sort of lesson where they can provide an explanation to like a really complex concept that the students might need explaining to them more than once. And by putting them onto a podcast and publishing that to the internet, students can access that whenever they want and from whichever location they are. So for example, some of the students involved in this project were watching podcasts on the school bus, on their way to school, on their way home, as they were driving or being driven around in their car. Probably wouldn't be a good idea to drive and watch a podcast, but yeah, so whenever they wanted to and whenever they needed to. So they wouldn't necessarily have to sort of go back to the teacher and ask them to give another explanation. That resource was available just in time whenever they needed it, and they could go back and revisit that as many times as they like. So far, the podcasts have been viewed around 35,000 times. And what I'm being told is it's good to go and get that explanation delivered again. Maybe a person, when they were in class and the teacher was explaining something, maybe they just weren't switched on, they were feeling tired, they'd had an argument with a boyfriend or girlfriend, that meant that they actually missed that the first time around. So the podcast allows them to go and revisit that explanation again. And also, it's been really useful for students with English as a second language, because they can actually work their way through a piece of learning at a pace that's suitable for them. And the same thing for students with maybe a lower level of ability. To give you an idea what the podcast actually it looks like, if you like, it is an audio-visual podcast that doesn't actually feature myself standing in front of a blackboard or anything like that, but is a mixture of diagrams, animations, video, with a track that's actually created by myself as like a voiceover. And then I publish those to YouTube. Okay, so the second of those 3 facets to the online learning community was the ability for students to create collaborative notes. So generally in a class, a student will have a notebook that they write in, and that notebook remains isolated and belongs just to them. Now, the idea of collaborative notes is that those notes that are in that book are used to actually create a bigger piece of work. So a set of notes that involve all the students actually contributing to make one final product that's really, really of high quality. Now, the beauty of this is that because the podcasts are actually there to sort of create a focus, the notes are actually focused on the podcast. So the information in there and actually sort of putting down their ideas that are related to that podcast. Now, the purpose of it in terms of pedagogy is, first of all, students are learning collaboratively. They're actually engaging with one another and trying to understand what each other are saying. They're also engaging critical thinking because they're thinking about the posts that students have made and deciding whether they are correct or not. So that means that they're being very, very active about the way that they're learning. And finally, from a teacher's point of view, they provide a really rich source of formative assessment data where an individual can actually look through, or a teacher, sorry, can look through the posts that have been made and look for misconceptions, things that the students have got wrong. And that gives us an idea of the type of direction we need to take future learning to ensure that we've developed a real thorough understanding of the concepts covered. So finally, we've also got a discussion forum. So if you imagine on this site, you've got, say, for example, a page about the structure of DNA. On that page, there will be learning intention and some ideas as to what a good learner would be able to do, which we refer to as success criteria. There'll be a podcast, which gives the information that we talked about a little while ago, the explanations of the difficult concepts there. There'll be a collaborative notes section where students create notes on that. And then finally, as we've just said there will be a forum where students can post questions about DNA structure that they can come up with at their own time. So the idea with this is that at any time, whether they're at home, whether they're at school, whenever they have a question, they can post this to the wiki, and then they can also reply to the questions that other students have posted. Now, number one, this is really good because it gives an opportunity for students to be really active in their learning process. But it also allows learning to be really personalized, because when a student posts a question about the learning, what they're actually doing is they're personalizing their learning. They're setting their own learning intention. And in addition to that, the idea that the questions are being posted and then replies are being posted and then students are reading the replies that other students have made provides another opportunity for students to learn collaboratively as they work together to create knowledge. But it also allows them to think critically about the responses that other people have made. So for example, I might post a question, another student may post an answer, and then a third student may critique the answer that the first student actually made. So the learning process is quite deep, it's very collaborative, very social, and it's something that's ongoing and it's happening all the time. So it's not just confined to what's happening in the classroom. So I have actually managed to sneak in one little more tourism plug here for New Zealand. As you can see, there's some of the beautiful places I was talking about on the screen there. But to the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the map of New Zealand. And all the little dots on that represent 30 schools, or more than 30 schools now, around New Zealand that are participating in this project. Now, these schools are from all over New Zealand. And as you can see in the picture there, the types of place that we have here is quite diverse. We have areas of very high socioeconomic background where the students are from quite wealthy families. And we also have students that are from low socioeconomic backgrounds as well, that are basically on the poverty line, if you like. We also have schools that are isolated in very rural locations and schools that are in relatively large cities. So what we're doing here with this idea of an online learning community, we're basically uniting the students and the teachers from all these different places online. So we're making educational opportunities more equitable for any teacher or learner. So for example, if a student is in a school and there is a new teacher to the school that doesn't have the same level of skill as one of the schools in one of the more high socioeconomic areas in a city, they can still access the same resources that those students at that high socioeconomic area might be able to obtain themselves. So I guess to sum this up, what we're saying is the online community, because it doesn't matter which school you are from, which background you have, whereabouts you live, you can still engage with really high quality resources and also engage with teachers and other learners from a variety of different backgrounds. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the learning community, and I hope I've managed to communicate reasonably well how that works and the pedagogy and the technology that's involved there. Now I would want to talk about a big part of the project. As I said earlier on, the project is called Keeping It Real, which is real world experiences activate learning. So that involved linking learners and teachers with things that are going on in the real world and in the community. So I want to talk a little bit about how we actually ended up connecting to the real world. And on your screen right now, you can see that there's a big emblem from the Shout project, which if you're not involved with already, is something that is a partnership between the Smithsonian Institute and Microsoft, where students are actually involved with collecting data around trees and basically linking that to climate change. And scientists are actually using the data that the students collect to actually inform their own work. So if you imagine schools all over the world, students are measuring information on tree growth, relating that to the climate, and then scientists are all of a sudden able to access this huge database of information. Now, we actually set this up at my school last year, and the students in the class that were the online learning class, the class that I started this whole project with, were used to set up, or basically were used to help our younger students set this up. And the problem was with that is that these students, the students in my older students in my class that were helping the younger students came back to class and said, this isn't fair. We never got to do anything like this when we were at school. Why can't we do something where we're actually collecting some real data and doing something more meaningful than working out of books? So we set about actually creating opportunities for them in a similar way. And as a Smithsonian, we're creating opportunities for our younger students. And to do this, we approached a local conservation genetics laboratory, and they agreed to give us some genetic data that was all around creating a DNA profile for an endangered bird here in New Zealand. So they gave students the data and basically said, this is what we want you to do, but they didn't give them a method. There was no answer in the back of the book because it had never been done before, and they basically left that data with the students and I to see what we could come up with. Now, I won't bore you with the details of how a DNA profile is actually created, but as you can see on the page there, it involves a lot of sort of complex analysis of lots and lots of text files. And the scientists in the lab basically have to go through maybe 1,000 individual text files to try and identify which pieces of DNA are good for a profile or bad for a profile. And basically I set the students an opportunity, okay, well, you need to do this, but maybe think about ways that you can use technology such as spreadsheets like Microsoft Excel, things like this, to actually make the process a little bit easier. And within the project, like I said, there was no method, the problem was set, and basically students were able to be as creative as they wanted in actually developing a method for this. It was also a task that was not just related to one thing. So it wasn't focused on just biology, although that was really important. It also required students to have solid ICT skills and use those skills in this task, in addition to maths, in addition to a number of other skills as well, such as programming, as we later found out. Now, a number of students, when they were working through this, heard how the scientists actually did it and thought that it was quite an odd way of doing it. So they actually went to enhance the process by creating their own piece of software. Now, this software, what it actually does, is read each individual text file automatically, create an Excel file, and the real bulk of this, the conclusion to it was the scientists generally took 1 to 2 days to analyze this kind of data as they create a profile. And bear in mind, these are the professionals. Now, using the software that the students actually created, they were able to shorten this task down to 50 minutes. And the solution that the students created, they used tools and skills that they didn't learn in my class. They didn't learn even in the school. They learned it in their own time, going online. They learned to write code and create their own software. So the open-ended nature of this actually allowed them to create a solution that I didn't even know was possible. And the long and short of that was that these students are now they're waiting for their article to be published by an international scientific journal, and the scientists themselves are now helping our students with that, as opposed to the students just helping the scientists. So it's a great example of how students in schools possess some fantastic skills, and we just need to learn how that we can set them tasks that challenge them to use all their different skills whilst also developing skills that will be useful later on down the line, such as how to collaborate, thinking critically, etc., etc., but also doing something helpful for the community that they live in. So I want to go back to the questions that we actually started with now and looking at those, how we can develop 21st century learning skills while still meeting the requirements of a curriculum and the standardized assessments that we all love so much, and also how we can provide challenges to students that develop the skills that we don't possess. So from my work, I found that there were two main ways to address these problems. The first thing is to think of the 21st century skills as free of context. What I mean by that is you can teach someone to think critically or work collaboratively on any kind of task. That could be related to many different contexts. So the idea here is to use the requirements of the curriculum or the assessment as content or context as ways to develop 21st century skills. So if students have to learn about DNA replication, have them collaborate and think critically as they are learning about DNA replication. So I guess this is a mindset of thinking of, as we're doing one thing, we're also doing the same. As we're teaching the stuff that's in the curriculum, we're also developing the 21st century skills. In terms of the second question about how can we provide challenges to students that develop the skills that we don't possess as teachers, I think what my research or my work has taught me is that we need to set them really big problems that leave their process open and let them be creative and draw on all their skills that they have. The more we tie them down with a particular method or process that they have to go through, the less opportunity there is for them to be creative, for them to make mistakes, and for them to learn from that and it feel like an authentic experience that they can actually sort of relate to and see how that fits into the real world. I think as teachers, we need to understand the outcome. Such as, for example, I needed to understand that students were creating a suitable profile with the genetic data that they were given. The means by which they reach that outcome isn't so important. I want to know that they've done it, but the means by which they actually come to that, I don't necessarily have to understand the method myself. I just have to know that it's reliable and it works. Now, this whole thing has actually made me feel that we actually, as educators, need to change the way that we think. So, as it says on the screen there, what I actually think we need to do is start thinking so much about what can I do to improve the way I teach, but maybe also think, how can I improve the way my students learn? So obviously teaching is about creating an environment where our students do learn, and I think that has to be the focus of it. So think of it, instead of thinking about what actions does the teacher have to do in the classroom, it's actually, okay, well, how can I create an environment that actually fosters the students to lead their own learning? So whilst the teacher still activates the learning and motivates them to want to know more, the students are actually able to lead that process themselves. And they're doing that by actually being active in that process, asking questions, posting responses, sharing ideas, and working collaboratively with one another. And I think our students deserve the credit for us to actually give them credit for the fact that they are actually outstanding people who, especially when we get to the point where they're quite old, have the potential to basically do lots of the things that adults in their community already do. But the difference with students is they don't have so many hang-ups as the people in our community, the adults actually do as well. They don't have so much cynicism and all those other things. They're still really fresh and really ready to go. And on that note, I'd just probably leave you with a couple of things to sort of ponder on, I guess. There's a quote here from Pearl S. Buck, who was a Nobel Prize winner for literature back in 1938. And it's basically, it sort of sums up what I'm just talking about here. The young do not know enough to be prudent, and therefore they attempt the impossible and achieve it generation after generation. And I think we need to give our students the opportunity to actually do that themselves. And I think that's going to involve changing the way that we actually operate as professionals. And as you can see on your screen there, a bit of an idea about what not to do. And when we're actually starting to focus on the development of 21st century skills. So obviously the teacher standing in front of his very eager looking class there, as he tells them, he expects them to all be independent, innovative, creative thinkers who will do exactly as he says. So obviously the dichotomy there between what he's actually wanting to develop and his actions are preventing him from doing that. So I'll finish up there. I hope this has been pretty clear. On the screen there you can see my contact details. I'll be really eager for you to get in touch. and whether by Twitter or email, or just check out the website. And I hope this has been useful, and thanks again.